Good morning, folks. If you're just joining, feel free to say hi in the chat function. We're going to get started in half a minute. Hey, Hugo. Hi, Michael. Okay, I think I'll get started so we really maximize our time here. Hello, everyone who's joining. I'm Kate from the NationSwell Council team. It's good to be with you guys. If you just joined, please feel free to say hi in the chat. Just say who you are, maybe what you're working on, where you're calling in from. Make sure in the chat you choose to all panelists and attendees so that everyone gets your message, not just me. Just a quick note that this is being recorded just for internal purposes only. We won't be sharing, and we're not live on Facebook right now. Everyone has been muted except for our speakers just to minimize background noise. But like I said, we definitely encourage you to use that chat function to engage with one another. And if you want to ask questions to our speakers, you can do so in the Q&A box on your Zoom. I'll be collecting those questions, and about halfway through, we can ask them to the speakers if you have questions or comments. I want to say lastly that this is the culminating event of the Future of Work track in the Build It Back Better campaign that NationSwell ran through last year and the beginning of this year, which aims to address the dual pandemics of COVID-19 and systemic racism and elevate leaders in our community who are working to build back systems that are more equitable, inclusive, and resilient. So a thank you to our partners at Verizon for making this conversation possible and the Future of Work track possible through this campaign. I'm going to turn it over to NationSwell CEO Greg Berman to introduce our wonderful speakers. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Kate. Welcome, council members, welcome guests. I see folks who are announcing themselves as you join, and it's an incredible group of leaders, innovators, and experts around some of the topics that we'll address today. And we have two amazing speakers to lead us in that conversation. We're so pleased to host this fireside conversation with our partner, council member, and great friend, Rose Stuckey Kirk. And we're delighted as well to welcome Mayor Frank Scott Jr. of Little Rock, Arkansas. Rose is Senior Vice President and Chief Corporate Social Responsibility Officer at Verizon. She oversees Verizon's CSR investment strategy and programmatic build-out, as well as Verizon's social impact marketing strategy. Rose is an award-winning journalist, a documentarian, a board member, and she is a community builder by nature. We are very lucky to know her. Rose and Verizon's leadership in this space is indispensable, and we're so inspired by their extraordinary work. They've been incredible partners throughout the Future of Work track to Build It Back Better, as Kate mentioned. And that is, of course, NationSwell's initiative designed to support innovative and influential leaders as we emerge from this crisis as a more equitable, inclusive, and high-functioning nation and world. We're also so happy to be joined for the first time today by Mayor Frank Scott Jr., a brilliant leader and new friend to NationSwell. In 2018, Little Rock made history and made the very wise decision in electing Mayor Scott as their first Black chief executive. And throughout the mayor's time in office, he continues to make historic strides in job growth, public safety, education, and much more. Our conversation today is a critically important one and something that is on many of our minds: accelerating economic recovery for Americans, especially those most underrepresented and left behind by the pandemic. We'll explore the role technology plays in building pathways to success for workers, students, and small businesses through solutions like digital inclusion, upskilling, and reskilling, and centering community at the core of it all. This promises to be a highly personal and unique opportunity to hear from two forward-thinking leaders, both of whom happen to be native Arkansans and who are deeply committed to giving back to the community that raised and nurtured them. So without further ado, I'm so happy to formally welcome Mayor Scott and Rose, and Mayor Scott, will turn it over to you to say hello, to tell us more about your great city and the Verizon Little Rock connection. So Rose, Mayor Scott, so great to be with you. We can't wait to hear this conversation.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you so much. It's indeed a pleasure.
to be with NationSwell, being a lifelong Arkansan and someone who's always studied great leaders. To all of you here, I'm a big fan of Rose Stuckey Kirk. And so when we got the invitation, I had to drop everything because I've loved her for quite some time. And to only just be in her presence, both personally and virtually, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to be with her. I am the proud and humbled servant of the city of Little Rock, Arkansas's state capital. We are truly a microcosm of the United States, where we're both rural and urban at the same time and have the same complexities of most large urban cities, being the largest city in a very small state. I truly enjoy the Verizon relationship that we've had for many, many years in helping our city to always be on the cutting edge of technology, but also having a corporate partner that understands the why in our city of how we move towards uniting, growing, and transforming, and always being there for our city in our time of need. Very grateful for all that Verizon does for our city. Thank you so much. Rose?
So Mayor Scott, thank you, first of all, for those kind words, that kind introduction. I appreciate that. And, you know, when you're from Arkansas, everyone knows each other. You know of each other. It's just a couple of clicks or a phone call away to figure out what the connection is. But what I so appreciate about this conversation is that our connection is really grounded in a commitment to making communities stronger and to addressing these systemic issues that get in the way of progress. You know, I left the state, and I left the state after I graduated from college there because I needed opportunity. And at the time, the state wasn't providing me with that. And I felt like I needed to go somewhere where there was going to be economic development to deliver on that. But my heart and my soul and my family's heart and soul remains in the state. So talk to me a little bit about how, as mayor, you approached knowing that you needed to grow economic opportunities in your state, and you had to do it in the midst of the pandemic. What were the factors that you were considering, and what's the growth that you've seen?
Thank you so much, Rose. It all comes back to the internal why. For me, and what we do every day as we wake up and walk into City Hall is how we focus on uniting, growing, and transforming our city. From the growth standpoint, I too have so many friends and loved ones that had to make the decision to leave Little Rock, to leave the state of Arkansas, to find other and better opportunities. And so when you understand that when you're in a highly relational state at that point in time, and there are opportunities that you aren't able to access unless you have the right relationships, it became something a bit of a deterrent for many people to want to choose to stay in Little Rock and stay in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And so as I decided to run for mayor, I wanted to change that. And the way you change that is by ensuring that you have what we call is equitable economics, but also having a leader that's focused on being the chief growth officer. And so in the midst of, and we've now been in office 26 months, when I took that oath on January 1st, 2019, I did not expect that we would go through a 500-year flood, a global pandemic, social and civil unrest this past summer, last month, January, literally political unrest. But in the midst of all of those unprecedented things, we've been able to push through the pandemic and experience historic year-over-year job growth, 4,000 jobs from companies like Amazon, CZ USA, Allegiant Health, Priority One, SMA Pharmacy. We've been able to do that because we were focused on equitable economics, but we have to be intentional about going after the business and showing the great desires that we have in our city and our state. But even moving forward with that, we also have to have a strong focus on equity and understanding, from my standpoint, equity from a public policy or a social impact business standpoint is understanding representation, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation, or religion, that due to those certain life circumstances, that we have to have appropriate access to opportunities and resources to get to an equal result. And I think that's what we all have to do as we focus more on jobs growth.
Yeah, so I love the fact that you are the mayor of the city, but you consider yourself the chief growth officer. I love that term. I love the fact that you brought 4,000 jobs into Little Rock in the midst of the pandemic. So let's talk more about, you know, equitable economic growth. So one of the things that we work on a lot at Verizon, my team, is how do we lift small businesses? We know that Small businesses fuel our economy, that most people work for small businesses in some capacity. They were hard hit by the pandemic. And if you look at businesses that were run by people of color, by women, by veterans, they were hit even harder because very often those businesses are in those personal services industries, right? It's hair salons, nail salons, et cetera. And so we've been working, and we are really, going to launch in May our Small Business Thrive Accelerator program, which is really about giving small businesses all the tools they need to build themselves back better, making sure that they have access to capital, to mentorship, to technology, a customized curriculum that they can engage in that helps them to actually stabilize themselves, understand how to use technology for their benefit, and actually grow their business. So we are really committed to helping the small businesses. And last year during the pandemic, we invested $7.5 million in giving free capital, $10,000, funds to small businesses. So your growth strategy includes not only bringing in those big companies, but also helping small businesses thrive. Talk to us about the landscape of small businesses in Little Rock, and what are some of the unique things that you're doing to help stabilize them and to help them grow?
Sure. One of the things I just want to commend Verizon on of always being at the right place at the right time, understanding the need. And so a few thoughts I don't want to get lost in this conversation is how Verizon understood the inequities that Little Rock was experiencing. As we all, the pandemic was a time of, we're still in it, number one, but it's been a time of separation. It's been a time of understanding glaring and acute inequities where literally the cover's been ripped off. And so many times when we think about the pandemic, we usually hear about the healthcare disparities, but also from a small business standpoint, there have been a lot of financial disparities. And so we saw those financial disparities from the lack of access to the payment protection program within most banks, because many of those, what we call the gig economy, those with one employee or close to 25, not the traditional Small Business Administration definition of a small business. We understood that those businesses did not have access to banks. We're grateful that the Biden-Harris administration has just changed some of the PPP program rules and regs to really have a greater emphasis on it. But we saw early on that those businesses that we all knew and loved here in Little Rock didn't necessarily have, while they did a great job at selling their particular service, but when it came time to accessing dollars, because we too had a program called our Small Business Emergency Assistance Program that we're able to access and leverage some CDBG dollars, but we too had to ask some of the same questions that banks were asking. And then you find out that while there's some businesses that do really good at selling the service, they may not have true operational excellence or financial excellence because they haven't had the opportunity to receive that technical education. And so one of the things that out of that we're focused on right now is creating what we call a Build Academy that's focused solely on new entrepreneurs, existing entrepreneurs to understand financial and operational excellence, to help them have the technical education. So when they're ready to receive access to capital, they don't misuse that capital and create an unsafe burden for themselves. So that's number one. Number two, what we've also found in the small business standpoint is that everyone has to have access to broadband. And generally, broadband, whether it's for the remote worker, for the aspiring entrepreneur, it's generally from a urban perspective. It's not just a rural issue. From an urban perspective, it becomes the availability from an affordability standpoint. And so I want to take this time to thank Verizon. Not only have you been able to help businesses during this time, you've also been able to help our children. And so here in Little Rock, we focused a lot on our community schools model. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but Verizon stepped up when we had some of our most at-risk children who did not have access to broadband and internet services from an affordability standpoint. Verizon helped provide hotspots for these children that still needed to have access to their education in this new world. And so when we're talking about small businesses, we have to focus on this Build Academy. We have to create more accelerators for Black and brown businesses to ensure that there's an understanding of the capital, where the capital is, and being prepared for the capital once he or she obtains it.
Yeah, so I think you raise a couple of great points is that operational discipline that we need to help small businesses with. And that's the work that we're doing with our accelerator program. So excited to hear what you're doing. We should think about some partnerships and some of that work because it really does boil down to folks need to figure out how to help those businesses be successful, and that operational excellence isn't always there because frankly sometimes people are great entrepreneurs. They know exactly how to get the hustle on, as my 21-year-old would call it, but they need to know how to stabilize that business for the long haul. So I appreciate exactly what you're doing there to ensure that. I think the other component of what you talked about, there are two things I want to pick up on. First of all is this need for digital connectivity, digital inclusiveness. So we think about how to bring people across the divide with four components. How do we ensure access, making it as widely available as possible, and really paying attention to areas where we are doing our build out, and ensuring that we're meeting the needs of rural deserts, urban deserts. How do we assure affordability with things like, Fios Forward that is providing people with broadband connectivity in their home at a really, really low rate, and it's great connectivity. And then how do we do advocacy work? Really making sure that we're putting the right policies in place at the federal and the state level to ensure that people can be connected, and then the application work. And what you were talking about with the school program is a bit of application work for us. In addition to the work that we did with hotspots, we've adopted 3 of your middle schools there in Little Rock. And when we say adopt, that means that we're providing every single student, teacher, administrator with a fully rich, free technology curriculum. They get the device, they get the access, they get the understanding of how to apply that technology to all of their academic classes. And the students and the teachers, the administrators have access to those devices 24/7. And so we are making sure that we're not just talking about the benefit of technology, but we are gifting it in very critical areas, and that we are teaching people how to apply it, because that generation of young people in middle school, a lot of them will go on to be the entrepreneurs and the employees that's going to fuel your economy. And we want to make sure that at that critical point of middle school that we have everything that they need to develop that mindset and be comfortable with technology so that they can help fuel your economy and help build it back better.
No, thank you so much. One of the things, Rose, that I want to share with you, just some other things that I think we, whether you're a government or you are in the private sector, when we're talking about equitable economics, yes, we want to focus on this Build Academy and the technical education. I do think the onus is on anchor institutions to really be intentional about the work that we're all doing. And so one of the things that we understand, if you're from Little Rock, which and you're very familiar, Rose, Little Rock historically was divided through racist redlining in its early years of its inception. And literally that redlining was cemented by interstate by the name of South of 630. And so really where it's created a have and a have nots, where most of the businesses and or residents within South of 630 are where I live is low to moderate income. And so one of the things that, and when we talk about our equitable economics, is not just solely our Build Academy, it's also our South of 630, East of 30 economic incentives. So for the first time in Little Rock's history, we created an incentive package to help encourage more development South of 630, East of 30 by waiving building permit fees, whether it be commercial or residential, to get more development there. In addition to that building permit fees, it was also waiving our Little Rock sewer fees, significantly reducing our water reconnect and connection fees to really get more development enticed about coming there. And so we as cities all have a role to play. And so it's more than just the technical education, it's the intentional opportunity to create more development. And then another opportunity I think we all have to focus on is what are we doing to connect our developers, our builders to the economy, to the economy that may have been left out and left behind and not truly connected to the true powerhouses of each individual city, by bringing people to the table to meet one another from that standpoint. And so we have to be intentional with that development, focusing on that, but also Southern Bancorp is a bank that's near and dear to my heart. My campaign chairman is the CEO, Darren Williams. He helped create a Little Rock Empowerment Fund, because there's also a period in time where some businesses aren't necessarily ready for traditional commercial banking, but also may not need it. But what they do need is some startup funding and some equity funding to really get them to the next level. And so when we're looking about that, we all have to be intentional about our development.
Yeah, so what I love about that is you're really addressing these systemic issues. First of all, you recognize here is my area where I have opportunity, right? And you went into that area to figure out the entire ecosystem of issues that you needed to remove in order to bring some development. And then you brought along the financial institutions to address that. And then thirdly, you brought people together for the right conversation at the table. But how are you ensuring then that once that development happens, that you have a skilled workforce that can actually take advantage of what you have done? What is your activity in that regard?
Well, our activity in that regard is truly our community schools model. One of the things, Little Rock's known for our civil rights history with the Little Rock 9 integrating Little Rock Central High, truly testing Brown versus Board of Education from 1954 on September the 24th, 1957, when those 9, literally teenagers, ages 14 to 17, assisted by the federal troops to walk inside that historic high school to change, because without the Little Rock 9, there's no Frank Scott Jr. And so one of the things now, 60 years later, our city's local school district has been under state control. And so when we got into office, we knew that the city of Little Rock traditionally had not been involved in the school district. They're two separate governances. But as you know, as a mayor is always going to be tested upon the education and the jobs of his or her tenure. And so one of the things that we want to do is put our money where our mouth was. We understood there was an issue, there was a problem. And what we wanted to do is create a strategic partnership with the Little Rock School District by creating a community schools model with wraparound services from as simple as addressing food insecurity to as complex as mental health and social services for our most at-risk schools within the school district, or for our most at-risk children. And so we've wrapped around these 4 to 8 schools that are really focused on these children from that standpoint to ensure that we create a community school and a holistic model to help them have educational achievement. And so this, that kind of work isn't sexy, but if we do the right thing and we're very intentional about that work with our most precious assets, our children, that 18 years from now, we're preparing the workforce for the future. And so we have to be very intentional about it, but also understand, as they're understanding this education, that they also have to have access to bridge the digital divide. And again, therein lies again that Verizon is very helpful from that standpoint.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting, is if I go back to my time growing up in Pine Bluff. So Pine Bluff is about 35 miles southeast of Little Rock.
Where my mama's from.
What'd you say?
Where my mama's from.
Where your mother is from. So that's why I'm sure
it's all right.
I'm sure if we shake the family tree, we'll find all the connections there. Yeah. But what's interesting about that, right, is growing up in a place where it was an industrial town. It was, if you were a professional there, you were probably either working at the local historically Black college, and university, the HBCU, as a professor, or you were in, the schools as a teacher. And then there was a lot of sort of opportunity that came from the factories, the industry there. So I grew up in really a blue collar town. And in growing up in that space, you understood that there were, people who had a little bit more than others, but you had a community that was surrounding you, and you had the opportunity to compete for everything and to participate in everything. And it wasn't such a stratification of income at that time. Now I fast forward to where we are in society, where the income issue is bigger than most. That really divides and separates us. We won't get into issues of systemic racism, but just this issue of equality, who has access, who doesn't. What I love about what you're doing is that you're bringing together everything that's needed to help these children be successful. You're engaging in the schools as mayor, kind of helping return them from state control to what it means to actually be in control of your own city schools. You're making sure that the mental health issues are addressed, the food scarcity issues are addressed. We're bringing in the technology to give the students the whole wraparound of what they need. And you're right, that's going to give us an educated, prepared workforce of the future. What we also need to talk about, though, is what's the here and now, because we're doing quite a bit of work on reskilling and upskilling and really helping people who are, undereducated have access to technology jobs and have access to jobs, period. So we're working across the nation with some really aggressive goals to ensure about 500,000 people are upskilled and reskilled for jobs in the new economy. What are you doing about those undereducated people in undereducated people inside of Little Rock who still have needs? How are you addressing that from a community perspective?
So one of the things that we're focused on, and it ties a little bit to our Build Academy because that's addressing entrepreneurs. But I think we also know there's this kind of generation of underskilled individuals that are between 18 to 24, number one. And then two, we have many that due to the pandemic and high unemployment that are kind of between 45 and 60 that are now forced, right, wrong, or indifferent, to see another career on their horizon and trying to figure different things out. And so while we want to ensure that the technical assistance also helps understand that there's a new wave of entrepreneurs, in addition to the traditional trades and apprenticeships, we have to have a greater focus on understand how do we develop more software developers? How do we develop more individuals who truly understand computer science and understand artificial intelligence, and as we move forward together. And so you have to have, in addition to when we're talking about our community schools model, we have to have more individuals, particularly Black and Brown, that are focused on STEM education as we move forward. And truly with that understanding information technology and how that truly is not only the information highway, it's the new economic highway. And so trying to have greater partnerships with organizations like Verizon to ensure that we're doing all that we can to move this type of technical assistance and technical education for the new entrepreneur that doesn't necessarily have to go to college, but understands the information technology and how it leverages to move forward, but also into our schools from a 9th grade to 12th grade standpoint. And so we've been partnering a lot about career academies too, with our local chamber, dealing with a forward NGL grant from that standpoint. So we gotta continue to focus on that upskilling by creating new entrepreneurs and understanding that everyone doesn't have to be an employee, but they can be an employer.
Yeah, and I think that's where, at Verizon, even as we think about our model of what's required, to work for us, we are reevaluating that college degree in some of our roles and asking ourselves, is it really necessary? Or is it, to everything that you said, having the technical skill set, having applied it in some capacity? And we're even, as a part of our upskilling and reskilling initiative, bringing on apprenticeships within our own IT department that they can, learn on the job and develop the skills that are needed. And I think as more companies began to embrace that model and think through, what their commitment is to community, that's where we're going to actually see these really broad changes that are needed to make sure that communities are whole. So let's talk a little bit about then for you, your reaction, right, to the pandemic. You had been in office about a year. You understood that everything that you thought was going to change. What are 3 critical things that you felt you had to do personally and professionally to make sure that all of your citizens could thrive during the pandemic?
One, I think it's going to sound a little weird to say, but in the midst of a crisis, we had to create a battle rhythm. And so to ensure that we were prepared, we had the ability to push through the evolving circumstances and figure out every way, how do we pay it forward? And so we created our own battle rhythm. And it's one of those things in leadership from the standpoint, while I'm the leader, you have great team members that are around you. I quickly realized that my spokesperson, Stephanie Jackson, I was way better at project management than I was. And so it was great as we created this battle rhythm that each day we kind of had our playbook on what we were going to do for our residents to ensure that, A, we were going to be early and assertive and aggressive on how we protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the residents of Little Rock. And so that's the reason why we were the first to come out with the mask mandate. We were the first to come out to transitioning our restaurants from in-person to no-person dining and moving towards curbside pickup and delivery. and online services from that standpoint, but also understanding from a local economy standpoint, it was hitting our restaurant owners so hard that we created new innovative ways from a planning standpoint that allowed them to utilize the extra space that they had in their restaurants to create a boutique or grocery store from that standpoint. And so, but also creating, understanding there are a lot of unserved and underserved communities, and how we created partnerships with Kroger and Edwards Food Giant to have mass distribution of PPE and things of that nature. So we had to create a battle rhythm, and I think that's the main thing. And then secondly, too, being a leader during these type of times, we had to have opportunities for self-care, because it was some of the most stressful times of my life was this past year, both professionally and personally. But when you have a battle rhythm, it helps you navigate.
Yeah. So I love that term battle rhythm, because I think we all felt like last year we were in just one big battle, and then we all looked for 2021 to give us something new, and we started out with the battle, right? But let's talk about battle rhythm in terms of addressing these systemic issues that you still are going to have to address to help your community thrive post-pandemic. What are the things that you're going to take with you that you can now see more clearly that if you address them, you can help move the city forward?
Well, first, one of my mentors, I was, in the middle of the pandemic, dealing with a different issue, wasn't necessarily economic, but he gave me a quote that I once shared that I'll never forget. When you have power, use it. And so, I've been blessed to have now a seat at the table. And one of the main reasons why I decided to run was when I was invited to the table and realized that I was only invited just to check a box, and I wasn't being listened to. And now that my team and I are at this table, we are being very intentional about every decision that we do to unite, grow, and transform. But we understand there are so many inequities. And so that's why we have 3 pillars. Those 3 pillars are justice and accountability, equitable economics, and the eradication of racism. And so every day we walk into office, we look at every policy, whether it's our community schools model, whether it's equitable economics, whether it's justice and accountability, whether it's planning and zoning. We're very intentional about our policies, and we look at it through an equity lens. And so we will be have made, and will continue to make every decision with that lens to ensure that, tomorrow is not guaranteed. So we're not waiting for the next election to make a decision. We're going to use all the available power and leadership right now to address all the inequities. I believe you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
that
ma'am.
my system just muted itself? Yeah. There's something in what you're saying, though, that I want to add, a fine point on, right? Because particularly coming from, a small state, a small town, being able to walk into the rooms that I can walk into now, I understand that space of when you have power, how you use it. What I would say is the opportunity is to marry that power with leadership and use it for good. And so your underlying foundation that it's all about equity. It's all about who do you bring along with you? How do you help lift entire generations of people is an important sort of, I would say, commitment that we all need to make, because I've seen a lot of places where power is used for evil and a lot of places where power is used for good. And so I appreciate sort of your approach to having 3 pillars and understanding how important that is, because in the work that I'm doing, it is all about equity. When I took over this role, the conversations I had at Verizon was that we did not need to use the hundreds of millions of dollars that I get to oversee to help people who already have hundreds of millions of dollars. What we need to do is to change the model and actually leverage and build out programs that are helping some of the most vulnerable populations. And, it was a journey for us to really begin to do that and change that and measure that and make sure that we were having a real impact. And that's why I appreciate, partnerships that we have with you and with others, because it's really all about people who are like-minded and who are trying to lift communities and deal with these systemic issues. So it's a pleasure to be able to engage in a conversation with someone from my home state who is every day thinking about the same things that we're thinking about. But I will tell you, it's not always easy. So let's talk a little bit about how we overcome what some of the challenges are and how we overcome some of those challenges, because every day isn't a bed of roses, as you know. How do you deal with the naysayers, and how do you overcome the issues that are getting in the way of trying to build it back better?
Well, I think one of the things you have to understand, anytime that a leader or organization is trying to um, foster organizational change, the three things are going to happen. Individuals or groups are going to accept the change. They're going to reject the change, which we respect, and go start a new opportunity, or they deny the change. And so when you see those naysayers that are going to deny the change, generally those are the individuals that are going to give you the most stress from those standpoints. But you have to understand, one, be intentional about understanding where they're coming from and their perspective, listening. If you end up still disagreeing, that you move forward and you do it as swiftly as possible, what I like to call deliberate haste, because many times people want to tire you out, time you out on situations. And that's why I call the denying standpoint, because they want to deny the change, because many times when you're addressing change, you may be impacting their world. You may be impacting resources that they become accustomed to, or even recycle for themselves and other organizations from that standpoint. And many times that's what we call the inverse effect of when you truly address equity. But we have to understand that equity is not taken away. It's ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to make a way. And so when you have that stress, you have to understand those are some certain burdens that we all will encounter if you truly want to serve, lead, and change all at the same time.
Yeah. And I think your point about, sometimes resistance is just a person's effort to tire you out and time you out. And I think that's why you have to be really clear about what you're solving for, and really be able to demonstrate the impacts of what you're having. That sort of very specific, measurement of success is an important component to demonstrate that this moves the needle forward. But I also love your whole, philosophy about helping people understand that giving equity to someone else doesn't take away opportunity for you.
Yeah,
it actually helps. Go ahead. Yeah,
well,
jump in. Yeah.
I'll give you a great example, and I apologize for interrupting.
No, I love it. Go ahead.
The whole tiring and timing out. I'll give you two quick examples. One, from a public police reform standpoint, we have led on that from our campaign and then to governing. There were two instances where we were the first city in the state of Arkansas to create a citizens review police board. And it was a very, very controversial vote. And many people wanted me to wait. Oh, well, just let things calm down. Mind you, this is summer 2019, not summer 2020. And you just have to share the why, and then lay it all on the table and share it from a community standpoint. Understand inequities. Understand the reason why we have to be accountable, clear, and transparent when it comes to police matters, and why we have to have the community involved as best as possible. That doesn't sway anything from a legal standpoint. And so we didn't wait. We utilized our power for good, and we acted with deliberate haste. That's number one. But the naysayers wanted us to wait. And if we would have waited, it would have never gotten passed. And then number two, literally, Little Rock up until the late fall 2019, early 2020, was a state capital city where its police department did not have body-worn cameras. I'm a firm believer that your budget is your moral document. And so we got an office that we're going to fund this. But literally, we had certain members of our city board who wanted us to wait on it. And we had to share, no, we have to have greater accountability, not only for our police officers, but for our community and vice versa. And there aligned, it became a budget matter, but I had to share with one of those city directors, this is why we need to do it. And this is why we're going to pursue it. If you disagree, vote no. But we're going to move it forward. We're not going to wait and allow other factions to come about to defeat what we're trying to get done for the greater good. And now that being said, all of this post the George Floyd summer, his tragic death, but not only George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castile, Sandra Bland, countless others. We had already led on a lot of police reform. So as we were engaging with our protesters during that time, we were able to say, hey, here's some things that we've already worked on. We have more work to do. But we're so happy that we had already laid that foundation. But if we would have listened to those naysayers, those who try to time you and tire you out, just don't know where we would be as a city.
For some reason, I keep getting muted. So I don't know if that's a hint for me or what, but the system keeps muting me. But I do love sort of the way that you sort of talk about it in terms of, people trying to time you out, because that is, I think, our biggest issue as a nation, is that we are grappling with huge systemic issues, and the debates about these issues go on for far too long, and for frankly, far too many of the wrong reasons. And so the opportunity is to stop the debate and start moving into action. And guess what? Nothing will be perfect the first time around. The benefit of being iterative is that you get to continue to improve for the good of everyone. And I think that's also a mindset that we have to embrace, is we're going to learn, we're going to make some mistakes, we're going to make some things better. But in the process of doing that, we're going to pull some people forward in a way that would not have been possible. And so I think about that every day at Verizon as I challenge my team just to get out there and take the risk and move it forward, and don't, overthink it too much. Make sure it is as solid as it needs to be. Understand the ramifications, but know that it's not going to be perfect. And let's start helping, some individuals move forward, and then we will improve as we go. It seems to me that you are deliberate in your decision making, but you're also, putting out there some new programs and initiatives that are designed to actually address some critical issues and not allowing people to time you out. So my understanding is that there are some people who have some questions for us. So we're going to segue a little bit and let NationSwell sort of walk us through those questions. Happy to engage with the audience.
Awesome.
Thanks, Rose. Yeah, we did have a couple of questions, so I'll shoot them over to you guys now. The first is from Council Member Hugo Lentz. He says, Mayor Scott, you've mentioned waiving fees to get developers to work in disadvantaged areas and doing grassroots work to promote development, which was quite successful. What mistakes have you made so far? What did you think was going to work, but maybe didn't go as well as you were expected? What lessons did you have from any of those experiences?
Well, right now, one of them, I would say, learning opportunities rather than mistakes, is that I think when you're rolling out these certain initiatives, we have to do a good job of educating and sharing the why. And many times we may understand the why, and those that are going to be impacted by it, but those who are not may not understand the why. And so many people really, there are some developers at that point in time didn't understand why we were so laser focused. We thought it was, very much something that many people would not understand, but that gives a great example of that you have to always over communicate the why to help people understand. And then after sharing with those developers that, hey, we're focused on an area that has experienced blight. We're focused on an area that has a highly concentrated area of low to moderate income individuals. And here's the reason and the definition of equity. And this was a intentional, equitable policy to help and create more economic development. Because if we focus on that, one of the great things about addressing equity is understanding that there is a difference in access to opportunity. But when you create a balance with that access to opportunity, you grow opportunity. So what's good for south of 630, east of 30 is good for the entire city, and then vice versa.
Thanks, Mayor Scott. So one question for both of you guys. What are leadership qualities that will be most important to help communities rebuild and recover from the pandemic and subsequent economic downturn?
Yeah, I'll start and the mayor can jump in. I think, first of all, you've got to actually get on the ground as a leader, and you have to listen and understand what the need is. The worst thing that you can do, and we think about this a lot at Verizon, is we're not the corporate savior. We are a corporate partner. And in order to be a partner, it is a requirement that we are physically on the ground, listening, learning, understanding what the need is. And then you have to be a leader that is willing to modify kind of what you're thinking is right to make sure that you're meeting the needs. And then you have to be a leader who's going to use all of your power, back to that power conversation, that is all about how you bring the fullness of everything that you have in your arsenal to actually help and make a change. And then I would say empathy. Leadership without empathy, without understanding, is actually just narcissism. And so you've got to be that leader who is going to show up with empathy and understanding so that you can drive the right changes, and then, watch it, measure it, and be committed to it for the long haul.
No, I totally agree with all of Rose's comments. And so I'll share a different perspective because I totally agree. You have to listen, you have to utilize the power from that standpoint. But I also think as we're all rebuilding our cities and our states as we move forward, I think in this period of time, we have to be intentional, but really be intentional. What I call these 3 C's that I'm really focused on with our team in the midst of, as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're prayerfully coming out of the pandemic, is how do we focus on customer service, truly follow up and follow through, ensuring that, your word is bond from that standpoint. And then secondly is how do we all elevate and expand our communications across all modes of medium, but to all communities and audiences, and help ensure everyone understands the roadmap and the journey and the playbook. And then finally, the final C is cementing change through execution. And there's been a lot of changes that's happened in 2020 for the positive. And how do we ensure that that change is cemented through continuous execution to ensure that, all of the racial and equity policies that are happening right now, they happen for a reason, because there were racial inequities and a lack of policies as it relates to systematic racism and institutional racism. And how do we cement all of the positive change that we're seeing from corporate leaders like Verizon for the long term by expanding it?
Thanks. Rose, the next question's for you. We did have to put you on mute, Rose, because we were getting some feedback when Mayor Scott was talking, so make sure you take yourself off mute. But the question is, sorry, let me pull it up here. Great. They're curious. Joswell Placencia, another council member, is curious to dig deeper into how the virtual environment we are in has influenced collaboration between businesses and the communities they serve from a CSR perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. My team used to spend, I would say, 90% of their time in the field, because to my point earlier, we wanted to understand, listen, learn, see our work in action, and frankly, know the names of the people that we are helping. We had to change that model, of course, in a virtual world. And so now my team spends 90% of their time on meetings like this, actually talking to the community leaders, talking to the field, talking to the students, understanding the impact that we have made. I think it also, caused us to think through, did we have programs in place that could scale, and will they scale in the future, both virtually and in person? Because I don't think this world that we live in and how to deliver services and opportunity is going to go back to ever being 100% in person. Every single company, and I think every single entity, is figuring out what does both mean, and therefore how can you deliver to a greater level if you're doing both. So we are really very busily working through what that model can look like and how much we can extend then our work as a result of a different type of cost model associated with it. What it didn't change, though, were the issues that we were addressing. We were still addressing the issues of digital inclusion, lack of education and access to resources for vulnerable populations when it came to remote learning. We were addressing the issues of the need to upskill and reskill individuals, addressing small businesses and looking at the needs of rural America. So those issues didn't change. It's just how we delivered those services had a little bit more of a virtual component to it.
Absolutely. Another question from the audience, another council member, Jean-Claude Brizard. He thanks both of you. The question is, today's workforce and the jobs that propel young people towards economic stability and mobility requires a post-secondary credential. The matriculation and completion for people of color is quite disturbing. How are you thinking about the P16 landscape to change this narrative? I think either of you can start on that one.
Sure. I think it goes back to some of our commentary. I think we've been conditioned as a nation to solely focus on post-secondary education. You can just take a look at any of the top 100, top 1,000 richest and most wealthiest people in the world, and there's a great number of them that did not have a post-secondary education. And granted, that's not going to be the case for the wide majority of everyone. But my point there is I think we have to start turning our heads towards entrepreneurship and technical education in addition to, so it's not an either or, it's a both and, but understanding that we shouldn't always focus on being an employee, but how we can be an entrepreneur and an employer from that standpoint. So I do think that's number one, is having this greater focus on entrepreneurship, technical education. Two, I think we have to address too a lot of inequities within our local school districts, like what we're trying to do here in Little Rock with our community schools model. And then finally is we have to help the existing corporate America understand the significant gaps that are abound within the addressing of having educational requirements, but also even when you have the educational requirements and you meet those requirements, there are still inequities in salaries. It depends. You can go to. I'm a alumnus of the University of Memphis, but you can check, and someone goes to Harvard. We may have got the same degree and may made the same ACT score, but there's inequities based on where you go to college. And there's some people, whether people want to share it or not, there's some businesses that will give a higher starting pay grade than someone else. And so that fosters these wealth gaps that we see right now in our nation, just based on how we start. I think Rose may want to unclick and say something.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute there a little bit. Thank you, Mayor Scott. I think there's several ways that you have to address this issue. So I'll start with the fact that, we are still a society that believes that you need to have a college degree. And we understand the cost of that college degree, and you can leave people in 20, 30 years of debt because of all the student loans, which is going to have long-term ramifications on their economic success. So one thing that we do at Verizon is we try to make sure that we are shoring up a lot of those institutions that are providing a wonderful quality education for students, but don't have these huge endowments. So my team does a lot of work with historically Black colleges and universities and Hispanic serving institutions, about $16 million worth of investment to ensure that we are helping them be successful and respond to, a clientele that's not just Black or Hispanic, but also our other individuals, other ethnicities who take advantage of those institutions. And then we are very deliberate at Verizon in hiring from those institutions, having executive sponsorship for those institutions, bringing people in internships, so that that sort of sense of that college degree can work for you, no matter where you get it from, is a part of our nature at Verizon. And frankly, we have a lot of senior executives, to the point that Mayor Scott made, who don't even have college degrees. But what they had was the ability to do their jobs, be smart, add value, and climb up the ladder. And they are now, frankly, C-suite executives at the company. So I think that speaks to sort of who we are and how we value, intellect, not just that degree. The other component of that is exactly what Mayor Scott said, which is on the other end of it, some of the work I referenced earlier, which is making sure that we're giving people the skills they need for entrepreneurship, or taking people who may be unskilled or undereducated and giving them access to opportunities so they can learn, the skills that they need to make their way into a lot of these jobs, and then showing up small businesses. So I think the education system is an unfair system that judges you based upon exactly that, what college you came from. But I always try to remind people that all you need to do is get the first job. And once you get the first job, then it is on you to maximize the opportunity, and then also the system to be open to helping you maximize the opportunity. So don't get so hung up on where the degree comes from. If you are going down that path, just make sure that you can leverage it once you walk out the door.
Amen, Rose. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. Thank you both for these insights. You've given us a ton to think about here. We do have a lot of council members on this call, a lot of leaders in different organizations and sectors. If you could give us a call to action, how would you like our community to take away what you've said and bring it back into the world and in their communities? Would invite both of you to give a call to action.
Sure. Rose,
Rose, you want to go first?
Yeah, so absolutely. As a council member, I will start with those who are in the council who are in the corporate arena. What I would say to you is, take a look at what your corporation is really doing to actually help communities build back better. And if you can involve yourself in that and make sure that that work is authentic, and real and is scalable and is based upon a desire to actually be on the ground, partnering with people versus a desire to just do it from, on top and on high. You need to engage in making sure that you're helping your company be on the ground and actually driving real, authentic change. So that would be my call to action for my fellow council members.
Yes, and I definitely agree with Rose. And I would also add that to simply just be intentional and to ensure that your organizations are moving from, the equity statement, the racial equity healing statement, and move from those statements to true action as we move forward.
Thank you both so much for joining this conversation. Thanks again to our partners at Verizon for making this Build It Back Better track possible. We're really grateful for your time and insights today. And we will take that call to action back to the community.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you. And Mayor Scott, it's a pleasure.
Pleasure to see you. I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much, Rose.
Thank you. Thank you too.
We'll see you soon. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye.